So as our background picture so aptly demonstrates, we've decided to enter green field. There's really no other competitor. Several firms are doing, as Pablo mentioned, they're doing feasibility studies, but no one's yet actually moved to implementation stage. So the market's unsaturated, the market is emerging, and there's heavy state involvement, meaning that if we went in, we should go in alone and work directly with the state itself. To this effect, in terms of inputs, the wind is very abundant, as Pablo mentioned. Distribution channels are the state grid, and those are already in place. And it's state-owned construction firms that would handle construction and implementation of these turbines themselves. And finally, any good entry should come with a good exit, and so based upon Andrew's assessment of the political conditions in Kazakhstan, we've decided that we should continue to monitor Nazarbayev's kind of status as president of the country and see if there's a viable alternative to him after he passes and what kind of instability that would bring. So an exit strategy will be assessed from there. So I wanted to break down a little more of the components, labor, and synergies. So the components themselves, wind turbine components, are coming directly from the US and Germany. And these markets bring economies of scale and engineering expertise. But they'd have to be shipped and actually put together in Kazakhstan themselves. And so we're going to draw from the low-cost, abundant labor of Kazakhstan's state firms for implementation. And the synergies this would bring would be beneficial both for our firm in terms of cost, but also to the Kazakh government in terms of meeting a political mandate for employment. This will lower the cost long term because it'll facilitate a knowledge transfer. It'll train their engineers in terms of technical expertise. And like I mentioned in the overview, if this project is successful and we choose to replicate, this will facilitate low-cost replication down the line. Finally, in terms of other considerations, and these aren't unconsiderable, or inconsiderable rather, wind energy is complementary to hydrocarbons, so their existing exports of oil and gas would only be increased because they'd be able to divert more of it to China, to Russia, rather than depending on more of it for domestic consumption. In addition, this will meet Kazakhstan's Kyoto Protocol commitment. So this goes even a step further to meeting a green, more energy independent Kazakhstan's demands.
Okay. Now, to kind of just literally piggyback off of what Babak has just stated, the kind of brand image of the Kazakh Wind Initiative is to represent the first step towards an energy independent Kazakhstan. And what this means is taking Kazakhstan and their state now as not only a producer but an importer of energy that's produced by fossil fuels, but bring them to a place where they can contrast the hazards and harms of imported fossil fuel and kind of leverage that to gain an advantage by being a clean and green energy source. In addition to this, in terms of marketing, the overall idea is to educate the citizens of Kazakhstan to the advantages and benefits. And by enabling these people to understand what the differences are between the way they obtain energy now and the way they can obtain energy through the wind farm will allow them to not only be in support of the initiative, but also purchase the product long term. Okay, now when speaking of the marketing mix, we broke it into really 4 divisions: product, price, place, and then advertising and promotion together. So you go next. So the product. So obviously, because our product is fixed, the wind farm harnesses our energy upstream. And so the location of the wind farm attached to the grid will enable the company to create energy at a centralized location and use the government-controlled distribution facilities, the grid, to bring the product to the customer. It's a uniform product. There is no differentiation. Energy is bought per kilowatt hour from the companies who provide it. And given the channel of distribution, there's really no way for the wind farm to differentiate their energy from any of the other forms of energy other than its creation. So the price is uniform. The price of energy is purchased is determined by the government. The government has absolute say in virtually how the companies operate in their borders, and thus they influence directly how much this energy is going to cost. Due to the nature of the product and its distribution, it can be used throughout the country. Focusing in large areas, urban centers, particularly in the capital of the country, Astana, you'll be able to provide the citizens of the country with the energy given on the kind of distribution channel that's already in place. There needs to be no creation or adaptation of that grid because it simply transfers energy as we need it to. So the place for energy can be from urban businesses and households, which initially is the greatest concentration of people, and once you've kind of taken a serious percentage of this market, you can move forward into developing your rural markets. And so for advertising and promotion, because the government is in complete control of these channels, public service announcements and informational commercials on public television as well as other forms of media such as print allow us to speak to the consumer of the product directly. The government obviously would have to approve anything we say or do. With this, the Kazakh Wind Initiative would be able to convey the clearest and most honest and transparent idea of what the company is and what they provide. There are some out-of-home advertisings through billboards and other major city centers, and promotion through advertising as well as forms are limited due to the nature of the product.
So in conclusion, to kind of hit the point home, the expertise that our client is bringing to the table is in conjunction with the government, and it meets all political mandates. We've cleared all regulatory hurdles. We'd have first mover advantage, and the product is complementary to existing sources of energy, so they'd actually be able to reap more in terms of revenue from exporting more. And finally, like has already been mentioned, with success comes the prospect for replication. So that's our vision down the line. Thank you guys very much.
Okay. Now we have the VC questions. Who wants to start?
Is it possible to go directly to the consumers who wanted to build their own warehouse or their own? Would the government allow that?
Sure. Well, because the distribution channels are essentially how the energy gets to the end user, and they're all very tightly controlled by the state, there's actually no way that you could build a farm or any other way of generating electricity and sending that directly to the end user.
But I mean, if I had the
Purchasing
backyard.
the turbine, you mean?
Yeah, turbine.
Okay. Purchasing wind turbines in Kazakhstan is going to be a serious issue. Almost all of the infrastructure for collecting wind is outsourced to different producers in Germany and the United States. Given the regulatory nature of the government in Kazakhstan, I would guess that it would be pretty difficult for you to do this. Not only because of cost, but of the fact that once the government gets word that you're creating your own energy or finding a way to get around their system that they've set up, they're probably not going to allow you to do that.
I'm just going to piggyback on that quickly. You mentioned cost. I mean, not to get into too much detail, but what is this kind of project cost? What's the bottom line?
Well, the feasibility studies are being done now, and that really truly determines the size of the wind farm. And based on this, I mean, you're looking at figures of some couple $100 million to successfully attach a large wind farm to the grid. Given that land costs are low in Kazakhstan, particularly in the windy and unlivable portions of the country where we want to put it, it makes it a lot easier to kind of actualize the cost, because once you've gotten over the initial shock of kind of having to buy all of these turbines and all of the electrical current transferables, it becomes a lot easier to kind of slowly work towards profit. But there is a large startup cost at first, but the company that is looking to do this has already, kind of accepted that fact.
And what is that cost? What has that cost?
There's no way I could put a figure on it right now.
If I could answer it in a different way, kind of the other side of the coin is, our client is actually dealing with a state-owned firm. So we're dealing directly with the government, and their firms have a very soft budgetary constraint. So if this is something they want to do, and it meets their state, their political mandate, they'll pay $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million, whatever it takes, $5 billion, to get this set and replicated. So to that extent, cost wasn't the most immediate of our concerns.
What's your plan if the government decides to demand more control than you're ready to do?
Well, because we're only setting up the initial farm and then letting the wind flow directly into government distribution channels, it's pretty much their prerogative. And it'll actually be Kazakhs who are going to be employed to maintain, repair, and run this thing 24 hours a day. So it's really just the initial investment and startup expertise that we're worrying about here. That's a great question. Over there in the corner, the New York Times.
Do you think the government will pass on the savings to the consumer and user?
Do you think they'll pass the savings on to them?
Mm-hmm.
The government of Kazakhstan is notoriously quite tricky in what they do. No one really knows where a lot of the money they get goes to. I think that the government is trying to subsidize green efforts, though, so I feel like they would definitely be subsidizing this and making it cheaper for the consumer to make it more appealing to them, because the big thing they want to do is they like exporting their oil, they like exporting all those things, and they currently need to fulfill electricity deficit. They have blackouts and stuff, so they really want people to use it.
Okay, thank you very much.